Chapter 1. Why You Hesitate When You Speak. There is a strange moment that happens to almost everyone. Someone asks you a simple question. You know the answer. You have already formed the thought in your mind. Then you open your mouth and suddenly the words do not come out the way you expected. You pause. You say, You start a sentence, stop halfway through, and try again. Maybe you speak too quickly. Maybe you explain far more than necessary because you are trying to find the right words while already talking. And afterward, you think, why didn't I just say it clearly? The frustrating part is that hesitation does not necessarily mean you lack knowledge or intelligence. Sometimes you know exactly what you want to say. Your problem is getting the thought from your mind to your mouth without letting anxiety interfere. Imagine yourself in a meeting. Your manager asks, "What do you think about this proposal?" You have an opinion. You may even have several good reasons behind it. But suddenly, everyone is looking at you. Your brain begins doing too many things at once. Should I say this first? What if they disagree? Does this sound intelligent? What if I explain it badly? While you're asking yourself these questions, you're also trying to construct a sentence. That creates a problem. You are no longer focused entirely on communicating. Part of your attention is watching yourself. And that self-monitoring can make natural speech much harder. This is one reason people sometimes speak perfectly well with close friends, but struggle in meetings, interviews, presentations, or unfamiliar social situations. The pressure changes the way they use their voice. When you feel relaxed, you usually do not plan every sentence. You simply speak. When you feel judged, you may try to control every word. That is where hesitation often begins. There's another common mistake, trying to make every sentence perfect. You begin speaking. Then you notice that your wording could be better. So you correct yourself. No, what I mean is, actually, let me say that again. One correction is harmless. Constant correction creates a habit. Your brain starts expecting you to edit every sentence before you are allowed to finish it. Clear speakers do not necessarily have better vocabulary. They often have a different relationship with mistakes. They understand that a sentence does not need to be perfect to be understood. If the meaning is clear, they keep moving. That's an important skill to develop. Think before you speak, but do not think so much that you stop yourself from speaking. There's also a difference between a useful pause and nervous hesitation. A pause can be powerful. You can stop for a second, breathe, collect your thought, and continue. That sounds natural. Hesitation is different. It usually comes with uncertainty, filler words, repeated phrases, or unfinished sentences. The goal of voice training is not to eliminate every pause. It is to replace uncontrolled hesitation with deliberate control. Start with something very simple. The next time someone asks you a question, don't rush to answer. Take one calm breath. Ask yourself, what is the main thing I want them to understand? Then say that first. You don't need the perfect introduction. You don't need a complicated explanation. Start with the point. For example, I think we should change the schedule. Then explain why. Or, the main problem is the deadline. Then provide the details. This approach gives your mind direction. Instead of searching for the perfect sentence, you already know where the sentence is going. You can practice this every day. Choose a simple question and answer it aloud. What did I do today? What do I think about this? What would I change about my work? Give yourself a few seconds to think, then answer without restarting. If you make a mistake, continue. If you cannot find the exact word, use another word. The objective is not perfect speech. The objective is uninterrupted communication. Over time, your brain begins learning something important. You can speak without constantly monitoring every sentence. That is when hesitation starts losing its power. And this is only the beginning. In the chapters ahead, we will work on the psychology behind clear speech, the physical mechanics of your voice, breathing, pacing, confidence, organizing your thoughts, and speaking clearly under pressure. But for now, remember one idea. You do not need to become a different person to speak with confidence. You need to stop interrupting yourself. Train your mind to trust the thought. Train your voice to carry it, and give yourself permission to finish the sentence. If you found this chapter useful, like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can continue with the rest of the audiobook. More practical lessons are coming, and each chapter will take you one step closer to speaking with greater clarity, control, and confidence. Now, let's continue. What if the reason you sometimes struggle to speak clearly has very little to do with your vocabulary? You might know exactly what you want to say. You might even rehearse it in your head perfectly. But when the moment arrives, your thoughts move faster than your mouth. You rush, you swallow words, you change sentences halfway through. Then you hear yourself and think, why can't I just say what I mean? The answer may be simpler than you expect. Clear speech begins in the mind before it ever reaches the mouth. And if you want to train your voice, you first need to understand the mental process that controls it. Chapter 2. The psychology behind clear speech. Think about the last time you had to explain something important. Perhaps you were telling a colleague about a problem at work. Maybe you were answering a question in front of several people. Or perhaps you were having a difficult conversation with someone you cared about. You probably noticed something interesting. When you felt calm, your words came naturally. But when you felt nervous, the same words suddenly became difficult to organize. That is because speaking is not purely a mechanical activity. Your emotional state affects how you construct and deliver language. When you feel threatened or judged, your attention can shift away from communication and towards self-monitoring. Instead of thinking, what do I want this person to understand, you start thinking, how do I sound? Am I talking too much? Do they think I'm nervous? What if I make a mistake? That internal commentary consumes attention. And when too much attention is directed toward monitoring yourself, spontaneous speech becomes harder. This is one reason confident speakers often appear effortless. They are not necessarily thinking less, they are simply spending less mental energy watching themselves speak. Their attention remains focused on the message. That gives us an important principle. The clearer your attention, the clearer your communication tends to become. Now consider another problem, trying to say too much. Many people believe that sounding intelligent means providing more information. So when they explain an idea, they add another sentence, then another example, then another qualification. Eventually, the original point becomes buried. Clear communication usually works in the opposite direction. Before speaking, ask yourself, what is the one thing I want this person to understand? Not 5 things. 1. Once you know that, your language becomes easier to organize. For example, imagine your boss asks why a project is behind schedule. An uncertain answer might begin with the history of the project, explain several minor problems, mention what the team discussed yesterday, and eventually arrive at the real issue. A clearer answer might begin, the main delay is the supplier. We expected the materials last Monday, but they arrived 4 days late. Now the listener immediately understands the situation. You can explain the details afterward. This is not about speaking less simply for the sake of speaking less. It is about giving your listener a clear mental starting point. There's another psychological shift that matters just as much. Stop treating every conversation like a performance. You are not standing on a stage every time you speak. Most people are not examining every word you say. They're listening for meaning. They want to understand what you are trying to communicate. When you stop performing and start communicating, your voice often becomes more natural. Your breathing settles. Your pace becomes easier to control, and your sentences become less complicated. And hesitation begins to lose some of its power. So the next time you speak, don't ask yourself, how can I sound impressive? Ask, what do I want them to understand? That question changes everything, because a powerful voice does not begin with volume. It begins with clarity of thought. And in the next chapter, we will move from the mind to the voice itself, learning how to train the physical instrument that carries those thoughts into the world. Chapter 3. Train your voice, not just your words. Most people try to become better speakers by working on their words. They learn new vocabulary. They practice sentences. They watch videos about communication. Some even memorize what they want to say before entering an important conversation. Yet there is another part of communication that often gets ignored: your voice itself. The same sentence can sound confident, uncertain, friendly, nervous, intelligent, or uninterested, depending on how it is delivered. The words may remain exactly the same, but the listener receives a completely different impression. Consider the sentence, "I think this is the right decision." Now imagine it spoken quickly, quietly, with the voice rising at the end. It sounds uncertain. Say the same sentence at a controlled pace with a steady tone and a brief pause before the final words. The meaning feels different. This is why voice training matters. Your voice has several elements that you can learn to control: pace, volume, pitch, pauses, pronunciation, and breathing. You do not need to change your natural voice. You need to become more aware of how you use it. Start with pace. When people become nervous, they often speak faster. Their thoughts are moving quickly, and their mouth tries to keep up. The result is compressed speech. Words run into one another, endings disappear, and the listener has to work harder to follow the message. Slowing down does not mean speaking unnaturally slowly. It means giving important words enough space. Try reading a paragraph aloud today. Then read it again at roughly 80% of your original speed. Notice what changes. You may hear words you previously swallowed. You may notice that your breathing feels easier. You may even sound more confident without changing your vocabulary at all. Next comes the pause. A pause is not an empty space that needs to be filled. It is part of speech. A short pause before an important point can signal that something deserves attention. A pause after a question can make your response feel considered rather than rushed. Many hesitant speakers are uncomfortable with silence, so they fill every gap with you know, or unnecessary explanations. Instead, practice allowing 1 second of silence. It may feel much longer to you than it actually sounds to another person. Breathing is just as important. Shallow breathing often accompanies nervous speech. When you begin speaking from a tense state, your sentences may become shorter because you run out of comfortable breath halfway through them. Before an important conversation, take a slow breath through your nose and let your shoulders relax. Then begin speaking after the breath rather than while you are still trying to catch it. Your voice should feel supported, not forced. There is also the question of volume. Speaking louder does not automatically make you sound more confident. In fact, forcing your volume can create tension and make your delivery seem aggressive. Aim for a level that allows the person in front of you to hear every word comfortably. Confidence is often heard through control, not loudness. You can begin training these skills with a simple daily exercise. Spend 5 minutes reading aloud. Choose a page from a book, an article, or any piece of writing you enjoy. Read it once naturally, then read it again while focusing on your breathing. On the third reading, slow down and deliberately pause at periods and important phrases. Finally, record yourself. Listen, without judging your personality or appearance. Pay attention only to the voice. Are you rushing? Do your sentences fade at the end? Are certain words unclear? Do you use filler sounds whenever you need time to think? You are not looking for perfection, you are collecting information. Once you can hear your habits, you can change them. Your voice is not a fixed feature that you simply have to accept. The way you use it is a skill, and like most skills, it responds to deliberate practice. The goal is not to sound like a radio presenter or a professional actor. The goal is much more practical. Make your natural voice easier to understand, easier to listen to, and easier for you to control. Because when your voice becomes controlled, your words finally have the space they need to carry your meaning. Chapter 4. How to stop overthinking before you speak. Overthinking often begins quietly. You know you need to say something, but before the first word leaves your mouth, your mind starts running through possibilities. What should I say? What if that sounds stupid? Should I explain this first? Maybe I should wait. A few seconds later, the opportunity has passed, or you finally speak, but with so much hesitation that your original idea no longer sounds the way it did in your head. This is one of the biggest obstacles to clear communication. The problem is not thinking. The problem is thinking while trying to perform. When you speak, your brain has to manage several tasks at once. You need to understand the situation, choose your words, monitor the other person's reaction, and physically produce speech. If you also demand that every sentence be perfectly formulated, the mental workload becomes unnecessarily high. That is when speech starts to feel difficult. A useful way to reduce this pressure is to stop preparing sentences and start preparing ideas. Before an important conversation, don't memorize exactly what you are going to say. Instead, identify the main point. For example, if you need to ask your manager for more time on a project, you don't need to rehearse a perfect paragraph. You only need to know 3 things: what happened, what you need, and why. Once those points are clear, your brain has room to produce natural language. This also makes you more adaptable. If the other person interrupts you, asks a question, or changes the direction of the conversation, you won't lose your place because you were never dependent on a memorized script. Another useful technique is the 2-second start. When someone asks you a question, give yourself a brief moment to think. Not 10 seconds, not an awkward minute, just enough time to identify your main point. Take a breath, then begin. You might say, "Here's what I think. The main issue is. My first thought is." These phrases are simple, but they give your mind a clean starting point. More importantly, they prevent you from filling the opening silence with nervous words. There is another habit worth eliminating: mentally editing yourself while speaking. Suppose you begin explaining something and suddenly realize that your sentence could have been phrased better. Many people immediately restart.
No, that's not what I meant. Let me say that again. Occasionally, correcting yourself is necessary, But constantly restarting trains your brain to believe that the first version must be perfect. It doesn't. Sometimes the most confident thing you can do is continue. If your sentence is understandable, finish it. Your listener is usually more interested in your meaning than in whether every sentence was perfectly constructed. You should also become comfortable with a small amount of uncertainty. You do not need an immediate answer to every question. A confident speaker can say, "Let me think about that for a moment. I'm not sure yet. I'd need to check that before giving you a definite answer." These statements do not necessarily weaken your authority. In many situations, they can make you sound more thoughtful because you are refusing to invent an answer simply to avoid silence. The deeper lesson is this: clear speech requires mental space. If your attention is consumed by fear of judgment, there is less attention available for communication. So before you speak, shift your focus away from yourself. Don't think, "How do I sound?" Think, "What does this person need to understand?" That single change can reduce a surprising amount of pressure. You are no longer performing, you are communicating. And communication does not require perfect sentences. It requires a clear thought delivered with enough calmness for the other person to receive it. Practice this today. In your next conversation, notice the moment before you speak. When you feel the urge to rush, pause for one breath. Identify your main idea, then say the first clear sentence that expresses it. Don't search for the perfect sentence. Give yourself permission to speak before your mind has finished criticizing you. That is where hesitation begins to lose its control.
It is easy to sound confident when nothing is at stake. You are relaxed, you know the people around you. Nobody is waiting for an important answer. Then the situation changes. A manager asks you a difficult question. Someone challenges your opinion. You have to introduce yourself to a room full of strangers. Suddenly, the words that usually come naturally feel harder to find. Pressure exposes speaking habits. And if you have never trained your voice under pressure, your natural reaction may be to rush, become quieter, lose your train of thought, or fill every pause with unnecessary words. The solution is not to eliminate nervousness. That is unrealistic. The goal is to remain functional while nervous. One of the first things pressure changes is your breathing. When you feel threatened or judged, your breathing can become shorter and faster. Your body prepares for action, while your speech still requires control. So, before responding, do something simple. Exhale. You do not need an elaborate breathing routine. One slow exhale can interrupt the automatic rush to answer immediately. Then begin. This matters because many people try to inhale deeply while already speaking. Their sentences become crowded with words because they are trying to finish before their breath runs out. Instead, breathe first and speak second. Your pace will often become easier to control. Another important skill is learning how to handle difficult questions without panicking. Imagine someone asks you, "Why did you make that decision?" You feel pressure to defend yourself immediately. Instead of rushing into an explanation, begin with the central point. "I made that decision because the original approach was creating delays." Now you have established your position. You can explain the details afterward. This is a useful structure under pressure. Answer first, explain second. It prevents your response from becoming a long search for the point you are trying to make. Pressure can also make people speak too quickly because silence feels dangerous. They assume that if they stop talking, everyone will notice their nervousness. In reality, a brief pause often communicates the opposite. Imagine someone asks you a challenging question and you wait for 1 second before answering. That pause can make your response feel deliberate. Now, imagine answering immediately with 5 sentences, then changing your position halfway through. The second response may reveal more nervousness, even if the speaker is highly knowledgeable. So train yourself to tolerate silence. You can practice this in ordinary conversations. When someone asks you something, don't respond instantly every time. Take a short breath. Let the question finish. Decide what matters most, then answer. Another useful technique is anchor phrases. These are simple phrases that help you regain control when your thoughts become scattered. For example, the main point is, what I mean is, there are two things to consider here. Let me put it another way. These phrases give your brain a moment to reorganize without making the hesitation obvious. They also help your listener follow the structure of your answer. But be careful. An anchor phrase should guide your speech, not become another filler habit. Use it when you genuinely need a moment to organize your thoughts. You can also rehearse pressure deliberately. Ask a friend to give you unexpected questions. Record yourself answering them. Set a short time limit. Do not prepare the answers beforehand. The purpose is not to produce perfect responses. It is to teach your brain that uncertainty is survivable. The more often you experience the feeling of, I don't know exactly what I'm going to say, but I can still speak, the less threatening that feeling becomes. Eventually, pressure stops feeling like a command to rush. It becomes a signal to slow down. That is a major shift. You do not need to wait until you feel completely confident before speaking clearly. Confidence often develops after you repeatedly prove to yourself that you can remain composed in uncomfortable moments. So, the next time your heart beats faster before you speak, don't interpret that sensation as failure. Notice it. Exhale. Find the main point. Then speak. Your goal is not to become someone who never feels nervous. Your goal is to become someone whose voice remains steady even when nervousness is present. And that kind of control is far more useful than pretending you are never afraid. Chapter 6. Control your pace, pauses, and breathing. The difference between a voice that is difficult to follow and one that people naturally listen to is often surprisingly small. It may not be vocabulary. It may not be intelligence. Sometimes it is simply timing. A speaker who rushes can make a brilliant idea sound confusing. A speaker who pauses at the right moment can make an ordinary sentence feel deliberate. Your voice has rhythm. Once you learn to control that rhythm, speaking becomes much easier. Start with pace. Most people have a natural speeding speed, but that speed changes with emotion. When you are excited, you may accelerate. When you are nervous, you may rush. When you are tired or uncertain, you may slow down and lose energy. The goal is not to choose one permanent speed. The goal is to become flexible. Important ideas deserve space. Simple information can move faster. Think about how a good storyteller speaks. They do not deliver every sentence at exactly the same speed. They slow down before something meaningful, pause after an important statement, and move forward when the information becomes straightforward. That variation keeps the listener engaged. You can develop this skill with a simple exercise. Take a paragraph and read it aloud. On the first reading, speak naturally. On the second, deliberately slow down. On the third, exaggerate the pauses. Then listen to the recording. You will probably notice something interesting. The slowest version may feel strangely slow while you are speaking, yet sound perfectly normal when you listen to it. That happens because speakers experience their own voice differently from listeners. You hear the words while simultaneously thinking about what comes next. The listener only hears the final delivery. That is why recording yourself is so useful. It gives you an outside perspective. Now consider the pause. A pause is not a mistake. In fact, removing every pause can make your speech sound less confident because you appear to be afraid of silence. Instead, use silence intentionally. Pause before an important statement. Pause after asking a question. Pause when changing from one idea to another. And if you need a moment to think, take it. You do not have to fill every gap. There is a practical exercise you can use immediately. Choose a short paragraph and mark 3 places where you would naturally pause. Then read it aloud, making each pause slightly longer than usual. Afterward, repeat the paragraph without looking at the markings. See whether your speech now has a more natural rhythm. The next element is breathing. Your breathing is the foundation of your voice. When you breathe shallowly, your voice can become tight. You may run out of air halfway through a sentence, causing the final words to become quieter or rushed.
You can improve this by practicing diaphragmatic breathing, the kind of relaxed breathing that allows the abdomen and lower rib area to expand rather than relying entirely on the upper chest. You do not need to turn this into a complicated exercise. Stand comfortably, relax your shoulders, take a slow breath, then speak a short sentence while maintaining a steady airflow. The purpose is not to push more air through your voice. It is to stop fighting your breathing while you speak. One more habit deserves attention: ending your sentences clearly. Some people begin sentences with energy and then allow their voice to fade away at the end. Others raise their pitch on statements, unintentionally making them sound like questions. Pay attention to how your sentences finish. You want the final words to remain audible and intentional. This does not mean forcing your voice downward. It means completing the sentence instead of letting it disappear. Now combine everything. Choose a short paragraph. Breathe before you begin. Speak slightly slower than your normal pace. Pause at natural points. Emphasize important words. Finish each sentence clearly. Do this for 5 minutes a day. The changes may be subtle at first. You may not suddenly hear a completely different voice. That's fine. Voice training works through repetition. Over time, your breathing becomes more controlled, your pauses become more natural, and your pace becomes something you can adjust rather than something that happens automatically. Eventually, you stop thinking about these mechanics. That is the real objective. You practice consciously until control becomes automatic, because the strongest speakers are not constantly thinking about their voice. They have trained it enough that their voice works with them instead of against them. Chapter 7. Build a voice that sounds confident. Confidence is often heard before it is understood. You can have excellent ideas and strong knowledge, yet if your voice sounds uncertain, people may hesitate to trust what you are saying. This does not mean listeners are always fair. Human beings make quick judgments, and vocal cues are part of those judgments. The good news is that confidence in your voice is not something you either have or do not have. Much of it can be trained. Start with one of the most common habits of uncertain speech: raising your voice at the end of statements. Compare these two deliveries. I think this is the right approach. I think this is the right approach. The words are identical. The second version can sound as though the speaker is asking for permission rather than expressing an opinion. This does not mean every sentence should end with a deep, dramatic tone. That would sound artificial. The goal is simply to make statements sound like statements. Another important factor is volume. People sometimes assume that confidence means speaking loudly. It doesn't. A person who speaks too loudly can sound tense or aggressive. Someone who speaks too quietly may be difficult to follow. Confident volume is controlled volume. You should be loud enough to be heard without forcing your voice. Imagine that your voice is being directed toward the person listening rather than pushed at them. This small mental adjustment can make your delivery feel more relaxed.
Then there is vocal tension. When people are nervous, they often tighten their jaw, neck, and shoulders without realizing it. That tension can affect your voice, making it sound thin, strained, or rushed. Before an important conversation, consciously release your jaw. Drop your shoulders. Take one slow breath. Then speak. You are not trying to manufacture confidence. You are removing some of the physical tension that makes confidence harder to express. Your speaking posture matters as well. If you collapse into your chair, keep your head down, or breathe shallowly, your voice may reflect that physical position. Sit or stand in a way that gives your chest and neck room to move naturally. Keep your head balanced rather than pushing your chin forward or downward. Good posture does not mean standing like a soldier. It means giving your voice a stable physical foundation. There is another habit that can quietly weaken your delivery: unnecessary disclaimers. You may hear yourself saying, "I'm not really sure, but," "this might be a stupid idea," or "I could be wrong, but." Sometimes these phrases are appropriate. There are situations where uncertainty should be acknowledged. But if you use them automatically, they can make you sound less certain before you have even explained your idea. Instead, state the idea first.
For example, I think we should change the schedule. Then explain why. If genuinely have doubts, you can communicate them afterward. I'm not completely certain this will work, but the data suggests it is worth testing. That sounds very different from apologizing for having an opinion. Confidence also comes from finishing your sentences. When you know your point, let it land. Do not immediately soften it with extra words. A common pattern is, "I think we should move forward with this. I mean, unless you think maybe there's a better option. I'm not sure." The speaker may have intended to sound cooperative. Instead, the main idea becomes difficult to identify. Try, "I think we should move forward with this. If you see a problem I haven't considered, I'm open to discussing it." The second version is both confident and flexible. That combination matters. Real confidence does not require stubbornness. You can be direct while remaining open to correction. You can say, "I don't know." You can change your mind. You can ask for clarification. None of these behaviors automatically weaken your presence. In fact, the ability to remain calm while admitting uncertainty can make your communication feel more credible. For your daily practice, record yourself answering 5 simple questions. Do not focus on the content. Listen only to your delivery. Does your voice rise at the end of statements? Do you speak too quietly? Do you rush? Do your sentences fade? Do you sound as though you are apologizing for what you are saying? Pick one issue. Work on that one issue for a week. Then move to the next. You do not need to rebuild your entire voice at once. Confidence develops through small adjustments repeated enough that they become natural. And eventually, something important changes. You stop trying to sound confident. Your voice simply becomes more controlled, more grounded, and more comfortable carrying your thoughts. That is when confidence starts to sound authentic.
Chapter 8: How to Organize Your Thoughts While Speaking. A clear voice cannot rescue a confused message. You can speak slowly. You can pronounce every word perfectly. You can have a confident tone. But if your thoughts arrive in the wrong order, the listener still has to work to understand you. This is why some people seem naturally articulate. They are not necessarily thinking faster. They have learned how to arrange their thoughts before and during speech. The first principle is simple: know your point. Before explaining something, ask yourself, What am I actually trying to say? It sounds obvious, but many conversations become complicated because the speaker begins talking before answering that question. They start with background information, then they remember another detail, then they explain why the detail matters. Eventually, the listener is waiting for the main point. A better approach is to lead with the destination. Suppose someone asks why you want to change jobs. You could describe your entire work history before explaining the reason. Or you could begin, "I've decided to look for a new position because I want more responsibility." Now the listener knows what the conversation is about. Everything that follows has a place. This is one of the most useful structures for everyday speaking. Point, reason, example. Start with what you believe or want to communicate. Then explain why. If necessary, provide an example. Imagine a coworker asks whether a meeting should be moved to the afternoon. Instead of saying, "Well, I don't know. Mornings are usually busy, and yesterday we had that issue, and some people may be late," you could say, "I think we should move it to the afternoon. The mornings are usually our busiest period. Yesterday, several people had to leave the meeting to handle urgent work." The message is easier to follow because each sentence has a job. This structure also helps when you are nervous. You do not have to remember a long speech. You only need to remember the sequence: point, reason, example. Another useful tool is the numbered response. If you have several ideas, tell the listener how many there are. For example, "There are 2 reasons I think we should do this." That sentence creates a mental framework. Now the listener knows what to expect. You can then explain the first reason, move to the second, and finish. This is particularly useful during presentations, interviews, meetings, and difficult conversations.
It also reduces the chance that you will lose your place. But organization is not only about structure. It is also about knowing what to leave out. Many speakers become unclear because they include every thought that enters their mind. Not every detail deserves a sentence. Before adding another explanation, ask, "Does this help the listener understand my main point?" If the answer is no, leave it out. This does not mean becoming robotic or overly brief. Natural conversations include stories, humor, side comments, and unexpected turns. The point is to recognize when a tangent is useful and when it is simply a way of avoiding the main idea. You can practice this skill with a daily exercise called the 30-second explanation. Choose something you know well: a movie you watched, a problem at work, a hobby, a book. Then explain it in 30 seconds. You will quickly discover which details actually matter. If you cannot explain the idea simply, you may not yet understand which part of it is most important. Once you can explain it in 30 seconds, expand it to 1 minute, then 2 minutes. Notice what happens. Your longer explanation becomes clearer because you already know the central idea. Another useful habit is to pause between ideas. Do not allow one sentence to carry everything. Finish one thought, pause, move to the next. This creates structure without requiring complicated language. And when someone interrupts you, do not panic. Return to your main point. You can simply say, "Let me finish that thought," or "Coming back to the main point," then continue. The ability to return to your central idea is one of the clearest signs of organized thinking. You do not need to remember every word. You need to remember where you are going. Ultimately, speaking clearly is partly an exercise in mental discipline. Your listener should not have to reconstruct your argument while you are delivering it. Give them a path. Tell them the point. Explain the reason. Add the detail that matters, then stop. When your thoughts have structure, your voice becomes easier to control because your brain is no longer searching for direction while your mouth is already speaking. Clear speech is not simply about choosing better words. It is about giving your thoughts an order that another person can easily follow.
Chapter 9. Speak so people understand you the first time. Being understood is not the same as simply being heard. Someone can hear every word you say and still walk away unsure about what you meant. Maybe your explanation was too long. Maybe you used vague language. Perhaps you assumed the other person already understood the background. Clear communication requires something more than speaking correctly. You have to make understanding easy for the listener. One of the simplest ways to do that is to use concrete language. Compare these two statements. We need to improve the process. We need to reduce the time it takes to approve customer requests. The first sounds professional, but it is vague. The second gives the listener something specific to understand. Whenever possible, replace broad words with precise ones. Instead of saying there was a problem, identify the problem. Instead of saying things went badly, explain what happened. Instead of saying we need to fix this soon, give a time frame. Precision reduces confusion. But there is another side to clear communication that people often overlook: knowing your listener. The way you explain something to an expert should not be identical to the way you explain it to someone encountering the subject for the first time. Imagine you're explaining a technical problem to a customer. You may understand every technical detail involved, but the customer probably doesn't need all of it. They need to know what happened, what it means for them, and what happens next. So instead of explaining the internal system architecture, you might say, the payment didn't go through because the system couldn't verify the transaction. We're checking it now, and I'll update you as soon as it's resolved. That's enough. Clear communication is not about showing everything you know. It's about delivering what the other person needs. Another common problem is speaking in long sentences. When a sentence contains too many ideas, listeners have to hold the beginning in memory while waiting for the end. Shorter sentences often make important information easier to process. This doesn't mean every sentence should be short. Natural speech needs variety. But when you're explaining something important, give each major idea enough room. There's also the issue of pronunciation. You do not need to change your accent to speak clearly. Accent and clarity are different things. The goal is not to sound American, British, or like a professional broadcaster. The goal is for your words to be recognizable and easy to understand. Pay particular attention to word endings. When people speak quickly, sometimes they swallow the final sounds of words. Those small sounds can affect meaning. Slow down slightly when saying names, numbers, dates, technical terms, or other information that must be understood correctly. You should also learn to watch the listener. Communication is not a one-way performance. Look for signs of confusion.
If the person looks uncertain, pauses before responding, or asks a question that suggests they misunderstood you, do not simply repeat the same sentence louder. Try another explanation. You might say, "Let me explain that differently." Then use simpler language or a concrete example. That is not a failure. It is communication working as intended. Another powerful habit is checking understanding. For important instructions, you can ask, "Does that make sense?" Or, "Would you like me to clarify any part of that?" In professional situations, you can be even more specific. "Just to make sure we're aligned, I'll send the revised version by Friday. Is that what you expected?"
This creates an opportunity to correct misunderstandings before they become problems. Now consider something more subtle. Sometimes people speak unclearly because they are afraid of being too direct. They soften every statement. They use vague phrases such as maybe, sort of, I guess, or perhaps, even when they actually know what they mean. There is nothing wrong with polite language, but unnecessary uncertainty can hide the message. If you mean I disagree, you do not always need to say, I'm not sure, but maybe we could possibly look at it another way. You could simply say, I see it differently. Then explain why. Directness and rudeness are not the same thing. You can be clear while remaining respectful. The final skill is knowing when to stop. Once the listener understands your point, continuing to explain may actually reduce clarity. Many people weaken strong communication by adding unnecessary sentences after the message has already landed. Say what matters, make sure it is understood, then let the conversation continue. A good speaker does not make the listener work harder than necessary. They create a clear path from thought to meaning. So from today onward, before explaining something important, ask yourself 3 questions. What is my main point? What does this person actually need to know? And what is the clearest way to say it? If you can answer those 3 questions, your speech becomes easier to follow. And when people understand you the first time, something else happens. You stop repeating yourself. You stop adding unnecessary explanations. You become calmer. Your voice becomes more efficient. And gradually, people begin to recognize something valuable in the way you communicate. When you speak, they know exactly what you mean.
Chapter 10. The Daily Voice Training Method. A better voice is not built in one conversation. It is built through repetition. You do not need hours of practice every day. What matters more is consistency. A few focused minutes, repeated often enough, can change the way you breathe, pace your words, organize your thoughts, and respond under pressure. The purpose of this final chapter is to turn everything you have learned into a routine you can actually maintain. Start with 5 minutes of reading aloud. Choose something written in natural English. A book, an article, an essay, or even a script you have already written. Read at a comfortable pace. Do not rush to finish. Pay attention to pronunciation, breathing, and the endings of your sentences. If you notice yourself speeding up, slow down. If you run out of breath, pause. The goal is not performance. The goal is control. After reading, spend 2 minutes working on pauses. Take a short paragraph and mark the places where you want the listener to absorb an important idea. Read it again. This time, allow those pauses to exist. At first, silence may feel uncomfortable. Keep practicing. Eventually, you will discover that a pause does not make you sound uncertain. When used deliberately, it can make your speech sound more composed. Next, practice speaking without preparation. Choose a simple topic. Explain what you did today. Describe a book you recently read. Talk about a problem you solved. Give yourself 30 seconds. Then record your answer. Do not restart because you made a mistake. That part is important. If you stumble over a word, continue. If you forget a phrase, find another way to express the idea. You are training your brain to keep communicating instead of freezing up whenever something goes wrong. After a week, increase the exercise to 1 minute, then 2. You will gradually become more comfortable producing language without rehearsing every sentence in advance. Now add pressure. Ask yourself unexpected questions. What would you change about your work? What is one decision you regret? What makes someone trustworthy? What would you do differently if you had more time? Give yourself 2 seconds to think, then answer. This trains one of the most valuable skills in communication, thinking while remaining calm. You are not trying to produce perfect answers. You are teaching yourself that an unexpected question does not require panic. There is another exercise worth keeping permanently. Once or twice a week, listen to an old recording of yourself. Do not criticize your personality. Analyze the mechanics. Is your pace too fast? Are your sentences too long? Do you rely on filler words?
Do you speak too quietly? Do you lose energy at the end of sentences? Choose only one weakness to work on. Trying to fix everything at once usually creates frustration. Small improvements accumulate. And remember what this training is ultimately for. Not to create a dramatic voice. Not to make you sound like a professional announcer. Not to turn every conversation into a performance. The purpose is much simpler. You want your thoughts to reach another person without unnecessary distortion. You want to speak when you have something worth saying. You want to remain calm when you are nervous. You want to finish your sentences instead of abandoning them halfway through. You want your voice to reflect the calmness and clarity that already exist in your thinking. There will still be moments when you hesitate. There will be conversations where you lose your words. There will be days when your voice feels tired or your confidence disappears. That does not mean the training failed. It means you are human. The real measure of progress is what happens over time. Perhaps you notice that you no longer say every few seconds. Maybe you can answer unexpected questions without freezing. Perhaps you speak more slowly during difficult conversations. Maybe people stop you for asking to repeat yourself. These changes can seem small. They are not. They mean that your voice is becoming easier for you to control. And once control becomes familiar, confidence tends to follow. So keep the routine simple. 5 minutes of reading, 2 minutes of deliberate pauses, 1 short spontaneous recording, a few unexpected questions. Then listen, adjust, and repeat. You do not need to become a different person to become a better speaker. You only need to train the instrument you already have. Your voice carries your ideas, your personality, your judgment, and your presence. Train it patiently. Use it deliberately. And when the moment comes to speak, remember what this entire audiobook has been building toward. You do not need perfect words. You need a clear thought, a steady breath, and the confidence to let your voice finish it.